Hello, everyone. So, again, I'm your instructor for American Government and Politics. I'm Ms. Tindis Gajar Strasbaugh, and this is a little bit of a lecture video for week one to kind of help walk you through our curriculum that we're trying to learn and retain. And so, in other videos, you'll have seen, what to focus on in the class and what our syllabus is comprised of, as well as in our live sessions. But this one is for just walking through chapters 1 to 3 and highlighting some key concepts and key approaches to American government. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start in Blackboard and share my screen with you. Okay, so um, here is what your Blackboard looks like. And we're going to start in our textbook, which you can access two places. It's here in the Start Here under e-textbook. It's also down here under syllabus and ebook. It's the same book. It's just listed in two places in case, because you will need to use it a fair amount in this class. So I'm going to click onto eTextbook and it will take me to Cengage. I'm going to log in. Um, Now, if you have any trouble logging in, oh, that's not true. That's new. Okay, please hold. All right. Sorry about that slight delay. So in fact, um, I can't get to the textbook via the student view in Blackboard, but you should be able to. And something important that I wanted to show you is you should have received this email from Ms. Diane Fleming. She is really helpful with Blackboard and Cengage and all of that. So here she provides a link for if you need help logging into Cengage, you can go to office hours. Okay. Looks like there were some that already occurred. There are some throughout January and until February 4th. All right. And they are Zoom sessions, actually, it looks like. So um, anyone can join, even if you're not on campus. Great. So um, I'm going to walk through a few things just looking at the text with you, and then I have some slides to kind of talk through some of the other concepts for this week. Um, so this theme of freedom, order, or equality is going to recur throughout our text and throughout our course. The text invites us to look at government in through the lens of these three concepts. There are other concepts we do need to know, but these, pardon me, are going to be pretty important. I also want to highlight for you, so right now I'm at the beginning of part one, chapter one, and you can see how I'm navigating on the left. And then if I wanted to get rid of that navigation, I could just close it, using the X. But please do kind of scan these objectives at the beginning of each chapter. They will help you know what you need to retain and understand, such as, we'll get to this, but the terms under Objective 6 here. Also, at the end of each chapter, right, there is a summary that corresponds to each objective, and then there is a chapter quiz. So these are good ways to study and consider, did I catch that? Did I get that? And especially as we come up on our exams, you may want to use these, the objectives, the summary, and the quiz at the end. Okay, so also, we are going to start the very beginning and what is government and what is it for? And with these themes of order, freedom, and equality, It's starting with maintaining order is kind of one of the oldest concepts of what a government should do. It does say that government is about control. And as you well know, and as we're going to see in the course, there are a lot of different interpretations about how much the control should be, what should be controlled, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but this page discusses the freedom. Um, As we know, we are supposed to have freedom in America. We do have some freedom, a lot of freedom, but we also know that no freedom is absolute. From everything from how we drive our cars to, um, you know, freedom of speech, what we can do, what freedoms we have are balanced with this concept of maintaining order. And we'll talk about equality in a bit here. One thing to note about your text as well is all these bold words. I'll provide, especially in the first couple of weeks, lists of key concepts to know. But essentially, in each chapter that we cover, you want to know these words in bold. And when you click on it, it will give you the definition, right? Um, and as I mentioned just now, maintaining order is the oldest purpose of government. I wonder if anyone remembers who Thomas Hobbes is. And we want to remember who he is and what he was, sorry guys, what he was all about. He is from, the 17th century, and so you want to know his name is Hobbes. He wrote something called Leviathan, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about his thoughts in a minute here. Now, political theory, right? Um, when you're creating a government, which, about 250 years ago, the people who were fighting the British to become their own country, they were creating government, right? And you have a lot of concepts of what you want your government to be. And one of the ones that influenced what is America now is this theory from Hobbes. And so theory, it's basically a conceptual framework of something, and in political theory is a conceptual framework of how government should work or how to govern, right? So Hobbes is very pessimistic about human nature. He believes that without government, we're in a state of nature, meaning we're savage to each other, like not in a good way. We're cruel. We'll just take whatever we want. Well, yeah, we'll steal and kill, as it says here, right? That we are not good people, basically. And this is a famous quote from Hobbes: life in that state without the government would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So he actually wants a strong single ruler like a king. But you can guess that when our government here in America was being formed, they actually did not want that. And we'll get into the debates that occurred in a bit here. But he thought that if you have that strong government, then you have more safety from this state of nature and all the bad things that humans can do to each other. So do read the whole chapter, of course, on your own, but I'm just going to highlight a few points. Another important influential voice that carried through to the formation of the American government is John Locke. And Locke gives us this idea of protecting life, liberty, and property. And where do we see that? As it says here, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, they put in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so to Locke and then to, the colonists and revolutionaries, these are the things government should protect. And when the revolution happened, they're angry at, the British and the king because they're not finding that the British have protected their life, their liberty, and their happiness and their property, right? So essentially, John Locke's idea really influences the Declaration of Independence and beyond American government as established from that time and to this time. Um, it's important to know liberalism, that doesn't just mean like, oh, I vote on the left. It's actually just a belief that, government should give people freedom in general. So this doesn't mean the same thing as liberal, which it says right here. It's not the same thing, right? If you're a liberal voter, a liberal politician, or a liberal government, that's different. This is just about a state, meaning a country, should let people have some freedoms and some individual rights. Okay. This is where we get into all the isms that both your textbook and I would like you to be able to define. So these are more like the ideas that American government did not incorporate, but they are parts of political theory, and we need to know the difference among them. So you've definitely heard of communism. It has a lot of connotations in recent and 20th century history. Um, so the main concept here is all goods are equally shared, all ownership is shared, but the government closely controls this sharing. Um, so so there's that push and pull there. Public goods. People have a lot of thoughts and feelings about taxes, and as you may recall, unfair taxes were a big part of why America became its own country, right? But there's a concept that the government needs to provide public goods, and to do that, they can tax citizens. So public goods, things we need like roads, education, trash, etc. Um, all right, moving on briefly. So equality. Remember our three concepts: freedom, order, and equality, right? Not all governments think that it's important to promote or protect equality, and some people, prioritize it more than the others, right? Um, that said, it has become a really important part of particularly liberal democracies. And what I mean by liberal is the concept we just learned of it, not a certain political view. Although it's depending on which side of the political spectrum you are on as an individual thinker, you might feel like equality is more important or less important, or the government should have a bigger role in enforcing and ensuring equality, or a smaller role, right? So it includes economic equality, social equality, obviously racial equality, etc. Um, I am going to talk about this a little more in our slides. So I'm just going to go through the text a bit here with you. And so what we're doing now, you can kind of, as you read your text, you can kind of re-explain it to yourself in the way that I'm doing for you. I hope it's helpful as I'm doing it for you, but like when you read the text on your own, which again, please do that, you can say, okay, so this is telling me this means that, or etc., right? Um, Teach it to yourself in a way, even though I will be here to teach you as well. Okay, so this is important, and you're going to have an assignment on this in week one. There are two quote unquote models, which are kind of like a theory of democratic government. So in a democracy, right? It could be a majoritarian democracy, that could be the approach, or it could be a pluralist democracy. And, in the United States, we generally have both, a mix of both, right? But it can vary from one country to another, even if they're both democracies. So these two concepts as well are going to recur throughout the course and throughout your text. And so you want to be able to apply them, meaning you want to be able to understand what does each of those look like in practice. Okay? All right. Yes. Um, we will cover this in more detail, especially as we talk about civil liberties and civil rights a little bit later in the course. But let's think about different freedoms, freedom of and freedom from. And I'm sure that you can recall a few of the freedom ofs that we have, right? And again, none of them are absolute. They're all pretty much conditional, right? But freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, those are both from Amendment 1. Right to bear arms, right? That's a freedom of or to bear arms with some limitations, generally speaking. Freedom from, meaning like that kind of corresponds to order. We need to have freedom from, someone taking our property from us, freedom from someone hurting us, etc. And this, these freedom froms and freedoms of were also best articulated by President FDR Roosevelt. Shortly before the US entered World War II. So freedom from fear, freedom from want. So, and that kind of corresponds to the growing importance of equality in the last couple centuries in democracies. Um, Government has some sort of role to make the economy work for us, to make sure everyone is okay, no one's starving. And as we know, that is usually not executed in a perfect way, right? So here's a Norman Rockwell poster explaining um, they're tying, in this historical context, they're tying our American identity at the time to getting involved in an international conflict. I mean, there were a lot of other things going on. I mean, Pearl Harbor and Hawaii had been attacked, but yeah, so they're making this fundamental to our country's identity. All right, more Rockwell posters here. Um, we began to talk about order. And we were reading the Constitution this week, and I would like you to think about especially the preamble of the Constitution, which talks about ensuring domestic tranquility, but it promises to do several other things. So do read it carefully and reflect on each one. But that means like they're going to ensure orderly and peaceful, existence in America. Um, Now, there can be a conflict between what, as it says here, the social order, um, and freedom and equality, because for example, before the civil rights movement in much of America, or arguably all, if you were not white, your freedoms and your right to be equal, those were infringed upon by the social order, right? So there had to be a readjustment of the balance of what we as America considered order and freedom and equality and how those should work together, not just for some people, but for others. And we'll cover civil rights for different populations in more depth as the course goes on. So, of course, something really big in the news lately is law enforcement in America in the past few years and recently, whether it's police or, ICE, etc. So this is something to consider with our current events, that they're the ones who are supposed to safeguard. So make sure that we have that freedom from not being safe and all of that, but also freedom to. And so you can quickly think of examples where, besides the one I just gave you, where you have to balance that order and that freedom and that equality, and they can't all be, the only important thing, or, where will we be exactly? All right. So, and this is an important point about a democracy. Um, we need to have elections for it to be a democracy, and we need each person to have one vote for it to be a democracy, right? And that is a really egalitarian, it's radically egalitarian if you think about it. Now, there are other ways of influencing the political process and elections that if you have more money, you have, it's like having more votes in a way, but you still, each person, only one vote, right? One person, one vote. Um, and as it says here, in chapter 2, you get into more about what makes a democracy, and this is one important component of it. Now, it's possible to debate again about social equality um, and how equal the government needs to make it. And, we're going to get into a lot of questions and scenarios about how that looks or how it should look in America. We are also going to talk about equal opportunity. Something important to note is typically, so when people think of equality versus equity, these two phrases might be a way to explain them. So, equality of opportunity, meaning everyone gets the same equal chance, um, is a little different than equality of outcome, which can also be called equity, right? Because not everyone starts from the same advantages, or some people start with more advantages, and it's not based on those people's merit always or often, which also can be debated. But if there is a farther race to run to get to the same outcome, what will our society, what will our government do to ensure that equality of outcome or equity? And so, as Americans, we don't always agree about what that looks like as well, but there are some interesting situations where um, all our branches of government have, looked at that over time up till today. So rights, um, if you could consider that while there are many rights enumerated, particularly in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, are there more rights that we should all have that are not in there? Are there rights that we we should have more? Absolutely. What rights should be prioritized one over the other? And so I'm going to pause and ask you to think to yourself for a minute. If you were, you know, forming a government, what are the top three rights that you think are the most important? It could be really broad, like the right to free speech. It could be really specific, like the right not to be drafted no matter what. It could be a freedom from or a freedom to. I mean, for me, I don't know if I would put this in the law or not, but I think that everyone should have a home or a house. And even if, they're struggling in their life in a variety of ways that have resulted in them not having a place to live, I feel like the government should work with our society and all the other uh, organizations and players and supporters to make sure that people are not homeless, right? Um, so I don't know if I'd put that in the Constitution, but I would say that's a right that's really important to me, right to housing, right? And so that's just an example to get you thinking. Consider, what rights do you think are the most important? All right. I am actually, this part ties into your assignment for this week, so we're going to move forward a little bit here. Okay. Over here under ideology and the scope of government, you want to be able to understand each of these isms, each of these concepts. So, and there could be some overlap among some of them. A totalitarian government is basically the government can control everything. That could be a dictatorship. That could be like a close-knit few groups that control everything. In theory, it could even be a diverse cross-sectional group of society, but whoever they are, they control everything, and the rest of the citizens do not have any, you know, choices, basically. Freedom and equality have been deprioritized if you have totalitarianism. Socialism. So you've heard of this as well. It's very similar and related to communism. Um, it's that concept of sharing, but the government kind of controls all the things that you're sharing. Um, You have a very regulated and directed economy. There's could be a little private ownership in the economy. And then you have kind of this hybrid democratic socialism. So maybe they approach the economy with that government control and sharing approach, but then they also think that yes, there should be some freedom, some civil liberties. Okay, I think everyone has heard of capitalism, but you're going to want to know the definition. Um, Free enterprise, right? Let the businesses do what they'll do. And if you're in an econ class, you probably have heard a lot about this. One form of capitalism is what they call laissez-faire capitalism, which is a French phrase that just means like let them do it, like let the industry, you know, let the economy be the economy, let corporations do what they do, make a profit, let it all balance itself out. As some people will argue, and as you may be familiar with, there can be then a lot of inequality depending on, how your free market, how your capitalism is working, right? Libertarianism. So these are actually not liberals. On the spectrum from left to right, they are on the right. Some of you might be libertarianisms, sorry, libertarians, and that's cool. But basically, less government intervention is where they're coming from. If you're a libertarian, this is not a liberal. This is someone who wants government not to intervene. Um, don't don't even protect my house. I'll protect my house. Don't even if I'm richer than someone or they're richer than me, that's not your job, government. Get out of my life, okay? So that's as oversimplified approach to that. And here I just put like the laissez-faire. So if you're a laissez-faire capitalist, you may be a libertarian. Those two things go together. Okay. Yeah, and this is what I just said too. Do not confuse libertarians with liberals, friends. All right. Liberal or with liberalism. You've probably heard of anarchy or anarchism with like some kind of intense concepts. They are, they're not even they're like more extreme libertarians in a way. Um, no government at all. Okay. Now, is that possible? I don't know. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it as we go through the course. I mean, if you think about it, is there a large country or a large society that really can function even going back in history without any government at all? Maybe there is. So I look forward to hearing thoughts. I want to be proven wrong on that, but it's hard for me to imagine in the times we're living in now an anarchy fully working. But when you watch those post-apocalyptic movies or shows or whatever, I mean, it kind of they form new governments, but on a smaller scale. But at first, anyway, it pretty much is anarchy after the whatever the big bad event happens after that occurs, right? And then, um, you know, we hear a lot about how our country is divided, but we are going to see in this course that yes, it is, but also liberals and conservatives on the whole spectrum of what a government could be, we're closer to one another than we may realize. Um, for example, even when we argue about gun control or right to bear arms in this country, I most conservatives still do not believe that that should be an absolute freedom, meaning no restrictions whatsoever. It's more about like how should the freedom be limited and how much and in what ways. And even on the other side of that, if someone is a liberal, they probably still believe that the Second Amendment is in the Constitution and it means something, right? So just an example to say, while we are a deeply divided society, sometimes we're closer than we think. In my mind, this is just a small side note of my opinion. We who are more in the middle than we think and closer than we think, should just ensure that we have a democratic republic. We have these freedoms in some way, shape, or form, and we honor our Constitution and don't become, totalitarian or anything like that. But that's end of opinion time from your professor, from your instructor. All right. Um, I would like to, I'm going to show you some slides now. So this is just for fun. As we will be reminded in the course, the French helped out the colonists or the revolutionaries a lot in getting their independence from Britain. And at some point after that, there was this French architect named Pierre L'Enfant, and he was the one who planned Washington, D.C. So this is an old map of it, and this is, pardon me, his plan for it. And like many cities, so I may have mentioned that I'm from there. I grew up in Northern Virginia. I lived in Maryland near DC, and I also lived in the city of DC as an adult, somewhere up on this top left area, northwest quadrant. But he laid it out in a grid, except for you also have these diagonals that allow you to quickly get across the city. So you have on the west to east streets, the horizontal ones, they're named for their letters, like A through Z. There's no Y. I don't think there's X either. And then actually there's no Z either. I think it stops at U. I think it stops at U. Anyway, and then the vertical ones are numbered, and then there's four quadrants to the city, named for their where they are, like in terms of the compass. So northwest, southwest, southeast, northeast. Capitol Hill's in northeast. Northwest is the bougiest area where a lot of people live. But nowadays the city has been gentrified a lot. Southeast used to be a really tough area. Parts of it may still be, but it has been gentrified a bit too. Okay. Something else just to like have as a piece of information or trivia, um, but like very serious trivia, is that so there is a place called the National Mall, and that's where all the monuments are. If you've ever visited, you've probably been there. Like that's where you'd go on a school field trip is the National Mall. And they have all the museums there, and they have like the monuments, like at one end is the Washington Monument, the big, tall, pointy one. And at the other end is the Lincoln Memorial. He's the gentleman sitting on the big chair, and there's columns. And then around the tidal basin where the Potomac River comes in are Jefferson and some others. There is now a Dr. King monument down there as well. That area, well, first of all, it's called a mall, but it's not a shopping mall. But secondly, it also used to be a slave market where people were bought and sold. So it's kind of crazy to we must reflect on, all the parts of our history, right? And that is one of them. Here is this National Mall today that I was telling you about. Oh yes, and so beyond the Washington Monument, at the other end is the U.S. Capitol. Um, you can visit the U.S. Capitol. It's like open to the public, or I believe it still is. Sometimes you must schedule a tour to go actually in that building, but they hold hearings, and unless it's like a top secret hearing, but if it would be for like the Committee on Foreign Affairs or etc. You can go to one of the buildings that surround the Capitol, and that's where they have the hearings. And you can sit in as a member of the public after going through a metal detector and stuff, of course. And you can listen in and watch like senators and congresspersons talking about whatever issue is the topic at hand. They also stream these hearings now. Um, if you hear about the Smithsonian museums, they're the ones in the middle between the Washington Monument and the U.S. Capitol. I grew up going to those as a child. I still love them. I hope they always retain, their wonderful qualities. And then you kind of see the White House is up a little bit north of the National Mall at, of course, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Um, it's just a fun fact, but DC is also a city of neighborhoods. Not every neighborhood, but most neighborhoods retain they have like a personality and a quality. Maybe some of you know what I'm talking about from where you live. Um, and I talked about the four quadrants already, but here are the names of all the different neighborhoods, and some of them have changed a lot. For example, like in the middle, this U Street corridor in Columbia Heights. My mom used to hang out there many years ago, and then I used to hang out there too. And essentially, it's become a lot more gentrified. It used to be where a lot of recent Latino immigrants were, and now it's just a little bit more expensive to live there than it once was. Here are these key concepts I told you about. We do need to just keep an eye on those bold words in each chapter. I haven't talked about a few of these other concepts of democracy yet, but I will. But please look in these three concepts, sorry, chapters, and kind of make sure that you are noting these concepts. We talked about how there can be tension among these order, freedom, and equality, and that is part of your homework for this week to discuss that. Here are some explanations of procedural democracy, and then we're going to talk about majoritarian. Um, this means that the people have to be involved in the process. This theory is more concerned with the journey. How did you get to whatever you decided, whatever law you made, whatever the government did? How did you get there? And so these five components are required for that for it to be procedurally democratic. And this peaceful transition of power was added more recently in your textbook because of the events particularly of January 6th several years ago, where, part of the important process is peacefully transitioning power, accepting the results of an election, etc. You also need everyone to participate. So we talked about one person, one vote. We're also going to talk later in the course about different ways people participate. And majority rule is an important component of how this may differ from from other theories of democracy, but these are the five here for procedural. Substantive, in contrast, this is more about where did you end up rather than how did you get there in the democracy, right? Um, so you need to have policies, laws, amendments to the Constitution, like in the Bill of Rights, that are democratic in their requirements, in their what they're protecting, what they're doing. And so it doesn't matter if like every single American participated or agreed on that. The substance of the law, the substance of the policy is what matters in substantive democratic theory. And then so these are two other contrasting concepts, majoritarian versus pluralist democracy. Um, we are going to talk about each of these bullet points a little more as the course goes on, but in a majoritarian, it's just whoever gets more wins, right? Whoever gets more votes wins, whoever gets more influence wins. Pluralist wants to make sure we are bringing everyone along, and they want to ask the experts. And they don't want just one majority to rule in all cases. They want, in pluralist democracy, interest groups are actually a good thing, right? I don't know what you think of when you think of those, but it's like, okay, we have an expert over here about pollution in our rivers. We have an expert over here about how to build the best highway. We have an expert over here about what are the best ways to not have our community be beleaguered by, drug overdoses or etc. Right? And so you would go to all those experts and you would take all of that in a pluralist democracy to make your policy, to make your decision. Okay, I have posted this video in Blackboard, and I would love for you to watch it. It kind of, you may be familiar with this crash course person and in lower grades, but I just find that he does a great job explaining how we got to certain things in our government and what they mean, and just breaking it down, simplifying it. So please do watch this in Blackboard. Oops. And that's it for the slides. Okay, everyone. So there are a lot of things to check out on in our first week of the course, but please note that every week we will have, like we do in week one, some sort of written assignment and some sort of discussion. Thank you, everyone. Talk to you soon.